I've got to say, when Zach and my colleague Giselle came to me and said, "Hey, we think we should do a webinar on mentoring and connectivity and how to rethink that within the learning space," it was an exciting opportunity because I got to think about who were people in the 10KC world that are innovating this and who've inspired our mission and our product. And I think Krista, and as one example, Manisha, Andrea, I was like texting them, I'm like, "You've got to come onto this webinar," and we pulled it together. And so here we are today. To all my panelists, thanks for joining. And I'm going to do intros in a second, but I got to say, there's one thing you'll take away from today. I pulled together the people I love to nerd out with on mentoring, connectivity, future of work. And we're going to get to just banter and kick off and dive into all different details over the next like 50 minutes. So although it's a panel and it's a webinar, it's going to be super informal. So as Zach shared, ask questions, challenge us, ask all those spicy things that you might be thinking of. We'll try to get to them throughout the call, but I can promise you, I've got panelists here who bring all different types of perspectives around mentoring, networking, connectivity, and we're going to dive into it all. So with that, I'll do a quick intro of myself. I'll set a quick agenda, and then we'll do a roundtable of intros of my panelists. By intro, my name is Dave, and I'm the co-founder of 10KC. We're the world's largest diversity-founded mentoring, networking, and skills development platform. So we have the great privilege of working with everybody here that's on the call in a variety of ways, as well as over 200 organizations around the world to help them build, deploy, and measure the best mentoring, connectivity, and skills development programs. I think now, as we're approaching the 3-year anniversary of George Floyd, which is an incredible time for us to reflect tomorrow and think about how we're doing against diversity and inclusion. It's a really important time for us to think about mentoring and connectivity in bigger ways. I think also while we're on this virtual conversation, I think many of us are also bringing people back into the office in different hybrid working arrangements. And that too is another compelling reason for all of us to think about how we best scale and create these human connections that are so important to the future of work and to our learning strategies. And so that's what 10KC gets to do. So we get to do every single day with so many different organizations around the world. And today we're going to nerd out on all this. And we're going to ask our panelists really tough questions to think about how they're solving this in their respective workplaces. So with that, I'm going to do a quick roundtable. We're just going to go in the order. And I'd love for the intro to not just, we'll start, Krista, with you first, but for you to share your intro, but also, as you think of mentoring and connectivity, what does that look like at Aimco, and how does that look over the next 12 months? So just a quick snapshot on that, and we'll do a roundtable around the room. So Krista, break the ice and say hello.
Yeah, thanks, Dave, and thanks for the invite on the panel. So like Dave said, my name's Krista Pell. I'm the Chief Human Resources Officer at Aimco, which stands for Alberta Investment Management Corporation. So we are a multi-asset investment management company with about $170 billion in assets. Alberta, for my American friends, Alberta is a province in Canada on the West Coast, and I am based in Calgary, which is, I always like to say it's some people say it's like the Denver of Canada or the Texas of Canada, depends on which way you go. So, in the next 12 months for us, we are highly focused on connectivity. And connectivity for us comes in a number of different ways. It is mentorship, it's group interaction, it's just, all of those things of like, how do we ensure collaboration, which is one of our organizational values, and really what tools can we use to ensure that, our nearly 700 employees across our 6 offices are able to connect and collaborate with ease. So that's what's on the agenda for us.
Thanks, Krista. Manisha.
Hi there. So Manisha Berman, I'm the CHRO for CI Financial. I've spent the last 20 years or so working primarily in financial services and along with consulting, both in HR and roles in the business. I've been at CI for a year and then also spent several years at BMO and RBC, which is where I met Dave. And we began our journey together around introducing mentoring and connectivity and pushing on the diversity agenda from several perspectives. Here at CI, we've been on a tremendous growth and transformation agenda. We went from not existing at all in the US to over 1,000 employees over the past 2.5 years, 28 acquisitions, and 400 billion in assets under management across the borders. We are both a wealth and asset management company. And when you do that, when you have that magnitude of change, transformation, and integration, it's so important to really push hard on the culture agenda and leverage networking and mentoring to build relationships and move from multiple cultures, multiple firms to really one company thinking.
Thanks for joining, Manisha. And Chris.
Hi, everyone. Chris Follett. My pronouns are they, them, and I am a member of McKesson's Global Impact Organization. I am a senior diversity, equity, and inclusion manager, and I've been with the company about 15 months now. I am calling in today from Atlanta, Georgia, and I am really excited about some of the things McKesson is looking to implement over the next 12 months. One of the strategies we're focusing on is office as a destination, really looking at ways to bring folks into the office for unique and exciting engagement opportunities. We recognize that many companies will never return to full-time in-office operations, and McKesson is one of those. And so how do we imagine the locations that we currently have and how those can work for us in a more meaningful way? We really want to look at further adoption and utilization of some of the existing mentorship and engagement programs we have. And we want them to be employee resource led. We think that that is really the way to ensure that there is adoption, engagement, and amplification. And so we're leaning heavily on our employee resource groups to help inform what the future of that engagement should look like over the next 12 months.
Thanks for joining, Chris. Andrea.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Dave. And it's so great to be on the panel. Andrea Ainsworth, I'm the director of Learning for Early Talents, which is a rotational program for 2 years. Currently, I'm in Waukesha. Originally, I'm from Hungary, and this is where I'm based, working for GE Healthcare. You might have heard the news. GE Healthcare actually spin off January the 4th from the GE mothership, I would say. And this is really exciting news for us. If you are thinking about a company which was 260,000 employees, now we are only 47,000 employees and colleagues around about 60 countries. So our diversity is massive in every front, and that is something which is coming in our values as well as a new company. And this is one of the most exciting parts. You are not joining another team, we are actually establishing our own existence. And this is how mentorship comes into place. If you are thinking about GE Healthcare, we are a healthcare company. We are looking at ourselves as a medtech company, very entrepreneurial, going on our own. And, what we are thinking about mentorship and where we are pedaling towards to is really, taking down the boundaries, what we have between the silos of the different functions. So if you are thinking about this is a global company, we have to give the opportunity for all of us to connect. Virtually, that's so easy. And also, if you think about the power of, the cross-functional existence and how we all learn together from each other, that is another brilliant way. One of the other pieces I would love to add here, and I hope that we have a chance to talk about, is the reverse mentoring, because I love just talking to my kids. I have 2 boys, and they are so savvy digitally, and I'm learning just so much. And this is what we are hoping to bring into GE Healthcare as well, is to just reverse back, and we can learn from each other and from all. So thank you so much.
There's so much there, Andrew, and it's always amazing to hear from a learning leader who's thinking of all these outside of the classroom experiences, because so often, and I don't know if it's awesome to see people introducing themselves on the chat, but feel free to also include your LinkedIn links. The spoiler alert is so often we hear these really random stories of people sharing LinkedIn and meeting new people and becoming like great friends or colleagues. So if you want to grow your network, feel free to drop that in there. But just going off, Andrew, what you'd shared around like learning leaders, I think we hear so often from employees, if I'm not in the classroom, am I really learning? But the reality is like so much learning happens informally. It happens through going for a walk and a coffee with a colleague. And I think more and more organizations are looking at creating offerings within their learning or their LMSs that really include those informal offerings like mentoring and networking. And so maybe I'm going to turn this question, Manisha, I'm going to get you to answer it first, and then I'm going to pass it to Chris at McKesson second. But how do you think, or what would be your advice to learning leaders for what role mentoring and networking plays within learning offerings? Like, what's the typical goals? Like, why should mentoring and networking be kind of a core offering within learning? So Manisha, maybe I'll have you go first and then Chris second.
Yeah, I mean, we all know this from school and the theory of it, which is that most people retain and learn more through practice and relationship than they ever would in a formal classroom setting. And yet often the effort, the investment, the time is still disproportionately focused on the more formal training aspects, which through COVID have also became virtual. And so we've distanced ourselves even more. And so if you really want to ensure that the learning lasts, because as you know, retention is quite low when you come out of a classroom setting, then equally and even more critical than what you teach in a formal, what can be an artificial classroom setting, is what you do afterwards. And that is supporting the application, helping build relationships, setting up good mentoring so that people can really process what they've learned and they've got a safe space to ask questions. And that's really still only one aspect of learning, which is the formal requirements of a job. The other part of it is all the things that you need to navigate when you're new to your career. And those things are never written anywhere in a textbook, right? It's all the nuanced things that you learn over time in your career around how to navigate social situations, how to problem solve. All those things require ongoing mentoring and relationships.
Yeah, well said. Yeah, everyone's kind of looking for that magical textbook, and it's like it doesn't exist. And it's really talking to people, getting to know each other. And I think even when we think about the different generations in the workplace, I think the new generation doesn't have that same skill set of how to have those human skills. And so it's more important for employers to systematically offer that. Chris at McKesson, I'll let you jump in.
Yeah, I mean, Manisha really said it beautifully. I think the thing that I would like to add here is ensuring that there are individuals who you feel comfortable enough being vulnerable with. And that trust does not often come in the classroom setting. In fact, very rarely will it come in that classroom setting. And sometimes it takes multiple engagements, multiple connections, mentors to find those individuals who you can truly show up as your authentic self with, and who you can share the challenges that you may be facing. Oftentimes it shows up in people with similar lived experiences as you, but sometimes it doesn't. And sometimes you need to explore multiple options to really find that support network. And so I would certainly encourage those who are looking to establish that type of mentorship, to seek out multiple forms of communication and engagement with as many people as you can to really find that right fit.
Yeah, really, really good points there. I think creating more spaces for people from different backgrounds and different departments to feel comfortable to have their people, and not to leave that to serendipity, I think is a really good D&I lens that we got to hold top of mind. And so, Zach, I think we're ready for our first poll question. So we'll launch this. What % of employees find it easier to find a job externally than internally? And this is from a recent Deloitte survey. And we'll speak about this in a little bit, because I think, as most people know, the majority of opportunity happens through connectivity and relationships. And oftentimes that actually isn't that easy to do internally, even though a lot of times leaders think it just happens. You know, that's how they got to where they are today. And so why doesn't everybody else just do it the way they did? But it's just not actually, doesn't actually work that way. And so when it comes to finding jobs internally or finding the right people internally, it'll be interesting to see how it's actually easier to meet people outside of the company. And the poll will come in a second. But as we do that, I'd love to kind of move to our next question. And Krista, I'll have you go first, and then we'll pass it to Andrea. Talk to us a little bit about the role of connectivity, because Krista, you talked about this in your strategy, and Andrea, you talked about breaking down silos. And I think many organizations talk about mentoring all day, but connectivity is kind of a different version of that is often kind of forgotten. And so talk us through kind of how you think about that and what that actually looks like.
Yeah, so I mean, and thanks for that, Dave. Connectivity for me is also paramount. When we talk about vulnerability and transparency, which then leads to individuals feeling engaged and a part of something. For me, that's connectivity. And so when I look at it, is we want right from from the recruitment phase, if we're bringing someone in that's new to the organization, in through that onboarding piece. I think a lot of our emerging talent, which is like our students and our new professionals, they need to feel connected. Everybody needs to feel connected, but in particular, potentially where there's new professionals. And we want to get them enveloped into who we are as an organization. And so that's got to come in a lot of different ways. Think about, you have introverts, extroverts, those who may be cautious to speak up, and we've got to find different ways for individuals to feel like they can speak. They can find, a friend at work immediately. And what are the ways in which we're going to do that? So we come right out of the gate, right through, potentially a recruitment process into onboarding, and really start to look at how we weave opportunities for connectivity early in an employment relationship. And then most importantly, how do we maintain that? I did some, mentoring with a new professional a couple of weeks ago, and we were talking about what makes success, what will enable this individual's success. And, it was ask every question you can, find an opportunity to say, hey, can I buy you a coffee? Find an opportunity to say, reach out, whether it be through, like 10KC, or sorry, that's 10,000 coffees for everybody in the call, 10,000 coffees, or even just through, Teams or however you communicate at work. So for me, connectivity can come in a variety of formats, but that the end result is engagement in the organization. It's learning, like every opportunity, every tidbit has a learning opportunity. And really then, depending on the organization, just further alignment to values and kind of that path forward for the organization.
Yeah, like accelerating. I love what you said around, like, how do you accelerate people to have those right conversations? I think often CHROs, directors of learning, are like telling people to do it, but then when you actually measure it at the end of it all, especially from a diversity lens, it's like usually not really that good, unless they're, of course, the squeaky wheels that just email everybody in the company. And so it's using, I know, Krista, you've done an incredible job using technology to scale those and make sure that everybody, no matter where they are, what background they have access to it. And so, Andrew, maybe I'll pass it to you, because you've done a lot around breaking silos. And I think, especially with the spinoff to that, tiny 45,000 person company or something that you were saying, it's going to be an important time to keep that going. So talk to us about how you think about connectivity, and then we'll share the answer in a second.
Yeah, no, this is brilliant. And I love how Krista was talking a little bit about onboarding, right? And when we are thinking about onboarding, what is important for us as well to recognize that it's not just the early talent who's leaving the university and doesn't have that really special book to say, how do you get connected? And in COVID, on virtual settings, what can I do to get to know people and, my own team? And even, as you said, what we are really trying to focus is to break down those silos, and the silos of the country, silos of the rooms, in a sense of, if you are a finance individual, you are working together with our supply chain, with our operations, with our engineers. How do you establish those connections. And more importantly, you might have had a networking event, you went out a happy hour, you met with somebody. But how do you keep up that engagement? How do you keep up that relationship? And lots of people, try to do it on MS Teams, as Krista was saying. But 10,000 coffee is a way for us to have that engagement and have that transformation, but you can actually easily, with a button and with tag with your phone, just to stay connected, and it doesn't feel like a burden, because that's another piece is what I feel. We talk about survey fatigues. It's connection fatigues as well. I mean, how many way of technology can you get engaged with your team, with your team members, and how can we help you to get the best? So, there are so many things here that we can kind of dwell into, is to say, the common activity is the way how we remain active. How do you build new relationship and, keep those relationships together, and the value. Lots of people, if you talk to Gen Z, the first question they ask, why should I do that? What's in it for me? And there has to be a purpose.
Yeah, well said. So the poll answer is C, 57%. And, I think what's important here is it's even, I know 90% would be really, really bad, but, more than half of employees find it easier to find a job from your competitors, from other organizations, than they do just to move internally. And, I think at a time when companies like Microsoft, as they do layoff announcements, the same press release says, oh, we're still hiring. I don't know if you noticed that, but it's one of the first times ever that we have press releases that have layoffs, but in the same press release, it's also saying we're still hiring. We're looking for those key skill sets. It's important for any organization, no matter what stage they're at in this economic environment, to make sure their top talent can find it easier to at least find a job at your own company than somewhere else. And connectivity and mentoring is table stakes for that to happen. We're going to load the next poll question as I move to the next question, because we're going to talk a little bit about inclusion here. And the poll question is around, male executives are what times more likely to hesitate to have a one-on-one meeting with junior women than men? And I think this is an important topic as you're answering the poll question, because connectivity that Krista and Andrea just talked through doesn't happen on its own. And when we look at different people from different backgrounds, if we just hope that they all get access to networks to be successful, whether you're a new hire like Manisha had described, the reality is they don't happen equally. And this is just from a gender lens. But of course, this gets even more complicated as we think about so many different elements of inclusion, whether it's introverted or extroverted, or whether it's even different people of color and many other barriers that people face in the workplace. And so, Chris, as somebody who's innovated so much on diversity and inclusion, I'd love for you to comment on some of the considerations that you think people on this call should consider as they try to solve how all of their employees get access to networks in a democratized way.
Yeah, thank you for that question. It's a big one. And I do think that it's so very important. And when possible, measuring the results and measuring the level of access is also super important. But a lot of these things are happening in these informal, affinity-based conversations. You went to this school, I have an affinity to that school, so I'm going to engage with you and take you under my wing and mentor you, right? So how are we creating more of those organic experiences? And I talked a little bit about ensuring that we're amplifying voices, partnering with our employee resource groups early and often, and ensuring that anything that we build has them at the center and forefront of helping us to craft and create these programs. Always having executive sponsorship for these employee resource groups is so very important, and ensure that they are amplifying their involvement and engagement. I can't stress that enough. Making sure that they're actively engaged and present, and that their leaders, the leaders, direct reports, have an understanding of how important these resource groups are study after study, survey after survey shows that they're our most engaged employees. So how do we continue to amplify those voices and create programs that highlight the skill sets within those groups? One of our ERGs, I just tangential story here, created a free agency program. They built and made this themselves to ultimately go and develop their own skill sets, to take on stretch assignments. Such a unique way of getting their name and experience out across the organization to take on more work. So I think that's what I would share.
I love that. And so thanks for sharing all of that. And I think it's been amazing to see how McKesson's leveraged technology to scale the impact of leaders through things like office hours and other functionalities. Obviously, a shameless plug on some of the 10KC toolkits, but I think it's really important to leverage technology to scale these kinds of conversations in effective ways. And so this poll, I guess, is kind of a trick question for everybody here, because the right answer is actually 12 times. And so that fewest people answered B. I know we're like tricking you with our highs and lows, thanks to Giselle for making sure people are paying attention. But male executives are 12 times more likely to hesitate to meet with their female colleagues. And Manisha, maybe I'll have you kind of jump in here, because you've scaled kind of networking and connectivity programs across tens of thousands of people. You've also been somebody that I've been able to, buy a coffee or sometimes wine and be able to pick your brain on all these strategies. So maybe talk us through kind of, when you have a stat like this, like 12 times more likely to hesitate, how do we scale networks so that everyone, or what are some of the tactics and plays that you've done that have actually worked?
Yeah, I think Chris has covered it off really well in terms of combining it with good leadership and programmatic strategies. I remember being at I participated in the diversity inclusion steer co at a previous organization, and I remember the leaders, sometimes it felt like we were railing against the problem and admiring the problem as opposed to solving the problem. And one of the questions I asked is, because there was always HR needs to build more programs. And I actually am a big believer that there should be a strategic programmatic approach, and you need to keep doing that. But the question I asked is, how many of you are personally mentoring a person of color, a woman, someone more junior? And very few were. And so, yes, of course, we absolutely have an accountability to design great programs, refresh them, put them out there, amplify them, scale through technology and tools like 10,000 Coffees. But leaders also each need to take personal accountability. And the reason, that's important for many reasons, but what I've observed is that sometimes with the more formal programs, you need to do it, but it can feel artificial. The mentoring relationship can feel artificial. It's like, a forced marriage or forced speed dating. Like sometimes the chemistry happens, sometimes it doesn't. But if a leader is personally reaching into his or her organization, observing people on the job, more natural relationships can be fostered. If they're personally making accountability that I'm going to host this many sessions over this period of time, and inviting people, noticing people doing well, noticing where a voice is not heard and they want to help amplify the voice and ask them what they think. If they're just doing that habitually on an ongoing basis, then that's going to really amplify the results of all the tools and the technology and the programs that we put out there.
Yeah, really well said. I know we have a lot of other fun poll questions for everybody here. So I think on the next one, which will kind of lead us to our next conversation, is predictor of performance. And I don't know what everyone's feeling here, but we put a lot of work into hiring the best talent. Where did they study? What skills do they have? What's their experience? Because the more we can hone in on that, the better they're going to perform and the better the teams are going to be. But this is an interesting stat around predictor of performance that I think, as you start to compound some of these insights around inclusion and around hybrid work, this might be a bit of a surprising one for everyone. But which of the following is the strongest predictor of employee performance of these five? And maybe as people are filling this out, I'm going to go around the room. I'm going to go Krista, Chris, Andrea, and then Manisha. what advice do you have? All of you have implemented and innovated, you've leveraged technology. What is some of the advice that you'd give to some of the L&D and talent leaders on this call as they're considering if and how they're going to solve some problems with mentoring or connectivity in the next 12 months? Any like hot tips, advice, stories, therapy comments? Krista, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is one where I like to call it the sandwich approach. You absolutely need executive and senior leader buy-in, and they've got to lead and demonstrate. And I think this is where, you know, not just going to mentorship or championing or connectivity one level. This is like you kind of multi-level. I'm a huge fan of reverse mentorship and reverse connectivity. So that's why I call it the sandwich, which is I think it needs to start with our kind of our emerging talent, our newer professionals, and then really marry that up with our senior professionals and just start to ebb and flow that through. So I guess if you were to say like what my advice is, you know, rally the senior troops. I don't think it's very challenging to rally the more junior staff. I think they're looking for it. One of the things that we do is, and you know, again, we're talking about nobody likes forced dating patterns. So I think that there's different connectivity, either virtual or in-person opportunities to create some natural connectivity. 10,000 Coffees allows you to do that. What are you interested in? What do you want to learn about? But I would say just, I think, get your executive involved, get your senior leaders involved, get your vocal folks involved, and really allow it to be organic, however, with some good programming behind. So I can't say that enough. That's what I would say, because if it's just, I mean, if you're just kind of working it through the mid-level or the lower level of the organization, you're going to struggle to give it a voice. And you need some champion faces and champion leaders in it.
I love that. And one of the things that we're going to come back to, because Chris, you're up, then Andrew, then Manisha, but make sure we don't forget, I think, to come back to what you said, Krista, around like it needs facilitations, but it's this balance of facilitating with organic nature. And I think a big headline that everyone's looking at right now is the Chief Diversity Officer of Uber and what happened in that conversation. And I think there's a lot to learn around how we still need to help leaders have the right conversations with people. Because if we just leave it to hope, or even some of the most skilled diversity and inclusion professors, it doesn't work. So we do need to make sure these conversations are organic, but still facilitated. So I love what you've shared there. We'll come back to that. Chris, over to you.
Yeah, Krista really did cover a lot of great points there. I think what I find really unique about measuring and deploying these types of programs is that we have an opportunity at every stage of an employee life cycle or phase to understand where they are, how they're performing, and to look for those hot spots. So, you know, that is one luxury I think that we have in this space, is actually having access to data. And then looking at ways, I loved what Krista said early on about onboarding, getting employees engaged from day one, or even at the recruiting component, getting them plugged into any of the affirmity groups or ERG groups that you have within your organization from the get-go. Getting them plugged into a network, a community is going to allow them to feel that much more of a sense of belonging from day one. And then I would also say, find ways to ensure that you're leveraging technology, because it is very challenging to build these programs from scratch if you're not utilizing something like 10,000 Coffees, which allows your employees to have the opportunity to meet with multiple people across geographies, to Andrea's earlier point, across business units, across the enterprise, and get that wide breadth of experience to hopefully find the true network that they need to advance their career for the long term.
Amazing, Chris. And Andrew, I'm going to pass it to you, but we're just going to do a quick poll. I'll share the results. Okay, so almost the winner, but it's network. So, and you know, on theme of our networking and mentoring webinar, but a network is a 5 times better predictor of performance, even more than these others. And for any of these stats, if anyone wants to nerd out on these, we can make sure that just like hit me up on LinkedIn or we have a lot of these data points, but a network is actually one of the best predictors of performance. And so you can't really solve for that when you hire people, because obviously their network's usually fairly low when they join the organization. But the day they start, how do you accelerate the right connections? And that doesn't mean be like, hey, Chris, go meet everybody in McKesson. And Chris is like, okay, do you want me to just start emailing everybody, or what do you want me to do? Like, how can we actually create technology, which I know has come up with a few of our panelists, because you can use data through platforms like 10,000 Coffees to accelerate the networks, but do it super deliberately. No one's got time to just email hundreds of people and go for coffees all day. Then they're probably not going to hit their goals. So anyways, that's the poll question. Andrea, over to you, and then Manisha.
Thank you. And I would just build on that, because one of the pieces what I have recognized is everybody has a great idea of, let's start a mentorship program, but nobody's really thinking about what happens if actually that works, right? So you start, and I don't know how many of our audiences have started this way, but you start with an Excel spreadsheet, and you have people who want to have mentorship, you have people who signs up, and you connect them. And then down the line, you are getting 100 and 200 and 300. And then what happens when these programs are working beautifully and you need to, go for thousands? And this is where technology comes into place. So I would really encourage everybody to not to look at, the next couple of months, think about if that works, what am I going to do? And is there an opportunity to start now? Because you can do pilots on these technologies. You don't have to have thousands of people. You can start with 30, linked together. So that's one of the piece that I would really encourage us to do. The other piece is you touched on network and on connectivity, right? Sometimes maybe we just put ourselves in a box to say, oh, this is a mentoring program. And lots of people don't know what mentoring program is. And it comes in all shapes of forms. So maybe that we have an opportunity just based on listening to all of you is to say, this is a connections. Do we really need to label it to make it work? Because, it depends on us.
Yeah, I love that. Excel spreadsheets, really great. Not so great for mentoring programs, but you know what the reality is, and we work with over 200 organizations around the world at 10,000 Coffees, and the best clients are actually the ones that have done Excel a few times, which I know everyone on here has. And so for any of the participants, feel free to give us share on your chat story any therapy comments or trials and tribulations of your Excel spreadsheet matching, if you run that or people in your org do it. But we can have a support group on that. Manisha, over to you.
Yeah, I've seen the Excel spreadsheet programs and as well, and I agree. I think that I'd recommend really thinking about your employees in segments, because I think if it is who wants, and everyone has done this at some point, but if it's who wants mentoring and who wants to be mentor, then you will get that kind of growing demand. So I would, a lot of times I find, respectfully to HR professionals, myself included, we fall in love with our own programs, and we have to actually start with what is the need of the business. What's the need of the clients? What's the outcome that I'm after? And I don't know that we can be totally democratic about it. I think we actually have to make some sharp decisions in terms of our employee segments. So for the broad employee base, there should always be foundational programs for the broad employee base where you actually do open it up and many people can access it, which is where something like 10,000 Coffees can help, or a spreadsheet driven program can help. And we then need to step back and say, what are some critical segments? Is it our revenue producing people? Is it our leaders of the future? And do we know who the talent is? So I would start with the question of what's my business objective? And do I know my talent? And if you don't know your talent, you need to start there. I have seen, examples where my HR team will say that something is going really well and is really effective. And then I'll talk to the business leader and they're not seeing the value. And that disconnect can happen if you don't start with them and really understand what their needs are.
Yeah, well said around the disconnect of whether results are working. And I think with mentoring and networking in particular, so many people are running them through their ERGs or BRGs on Excel spreadsheets. And so is there impact? Are we reaching the right people? And until you what gets measured gets done. And the reality is like sending out surveys 12 months after a mentor match is like probably not the best way to know if impact is happening. So of course, technology can make that way more dynamic in real time, so that what the business leader and what the HRBPs are thinking of is hopefully getting measured in real time, so that they're on the same page. Love that. So we have a question that's been submitted, and I'm going to try my best to keep going on the Q&A as we go. But the question that came in is, does anyone have tangible examples of programs that they've put into place that encourages male executives to lead with inclusivity in regards to forming relationships with women, minorities, junior employees? Who wants to jump on that one? I think all of you do. So Krista, do you want to go first? And then I see your hand up, and then we'll pass it around.
Yeah, so I mean, going back to twofold. One is we work, really tightly with Catalyst around leading in that DEI space and leading in that development and championing, women and minority groups. And we're fortunate we've got a CEO who leads from that space. He's a Catalyst Award winner in that space. But if I tie, if I tie that to our mentorship and connectivity programs, that is actually one of the ways that we do drive our executives and senior leaders forward as examples of, kind of how to marry diversity with connectivity and mentorship. So we aren't doing assigned relationships, but we will do twofold. We allow or encourage, I guess I would say, our senior leaders to select from a diverse group. So in essence, if you are a non-visible minority, we're going to say, look, you need to select somebody from either our visible minority group or one of our diversity groups, and then vice versa. If you are, depending on, the employee, they are going to be asked to do the same. We're fortunate, our leadership is about, 50-50 in most diversity examples. So we really drive that, in people picking. They're basically not allowed to pick clones of themselves. They need to go in and they need to find somebody who's going to add value in their learning experience, because they're going to bring diversity of thought and diversity of experience. So that's really how we do it. We do it right from, not to say you can't go out for a coffee with whoever you want, but, basically we're looking at how do we ensure we are connecting diverse thoughts and diverse experiences.
Dave, I would have a comment on that, if I may.
Yes, please.
So in GE Healthcare, in GE, we are extremely lucky because, our leadership is really building those relationships without us asking, as us meaning HR or the leadership development. However, I worked with an organization, and what we tried was a little bit a different in a way of, we had, because it was set in a virtual settings, we had avatars. So, you kind of closed out some of these biases of, you being on an MS Teams and you see each other, or, the background of the individuals. So we put it in more of a kind of VR settings where individuals just met, and, you pick up your avatar, you pick up your voice, and it was actually quite a fun way. And at the end of this project was quite an interesting observation of people, having those aha moments, and the meaningful conversation they were having without any biases, because I think that's the key here, is to avoid those biases.
Chris, I feel like you've done a lot to even like leverage technology to make it easy for, call it, allies to jump in, have coffees and other, but maybe you can share a bit and then we'll hop. And Manisha has a lot as well, but for the sake of time, we'll just have you end, and then I'll go to the next, probably the final question.
Yeah, I think one of the things that is so very important, and I both Krista and Andrea touched on this, is that around that executive sponsorship component, and talking about tangible ways to have them show up. I think it's really important to have small, dedicated focus groups, for a lack of a better term, but have that senior leader sit in with a very small group of individuals from, any category you identify, might need to have their voice heard or amplified, and have very candid conversations. Ensure that they have that direct access, create those small and intimate engagements. Office hours is a great way of doing that through their 10,000 Coffees platform. You can ultimately designate, we only want X number of individuals to take advantage of this opportunity with this senior leader. And they really get that undivided attention of that senior leader to ask the questions that they need to potentially, in many cases, when you have active and engaged senior leaders, they'll have an open door to connect with them even beyond that call. This is just the introduction. And then that creates that warm and inviting environment for them to reach out and maybe schedule that direct one-on-one.
Yeah, I love that. I think the office hours feature on 10,000 Coffees group matches leaders to very targeted groups. You can, that's Pan Asian Heritage Month, leaders could actually target and meet with those from the employee networks. And what we found is we actually had the CEO of PwC talk about how every time they travel to different cities, they just set up an office hour because it allows them to have very small kind of close listening sessions with all these different people. And it's not, I think as leaders and executives, and people on the call can probably relate to this, as you get more senior, you get more removed from the real things that people are talking through. And I know 10KC, we're about 70 people, and I feel that, let alone people here that are running, you know, hundreds and thousands of people. And so if you don't provide your leaders with structured ways to have those listening sessions, then it's like these leaders are getting in front of people, but comms has already kind of taken all the spice out of the conversation and told them what to say. And so you want to create those real grassroots opportunities, and office hours definitely does that. I think just that one of the questions I wanted to go back to, and Manisha, this came up in yours, is around segments. And a lot of times organizations in learning, they create a one-size-fits-all mentoring program. One-size-fits-all matching and program, and great, they've solved mentoring. But the reality is that mentoring or networks look differently for all different types of people. There's maybe like mass scale that might be more connectivity, and others that might be very sponsor driven for specific communities. Manisha, I think out of everyone here, you've probably, I might have this wrong, but I'm just going to make this up anyways, I think you've reached like 30,000 people in your past program with all different types of offerings. Maybe talk us through like the specific offerings that you were able to set up and launch, and how you were able to do that for the different segments like you'd mentioned before. Because I think allyship is built into all of those. It just looks a bit different for each segment.
Yeah, so I think, you know, what I find sometimes leaders will debate you on is if you do segmented programs, they'll say, well, why are you only focused on this group? What about everyone else? And we don't want an A and a B class, etc. So I think if leaders are feeling comfortable and confident that we've got the foundational programs at scale, which you do need to cover your entire employee base so they do feel all are supported, then I think you can start to peel out and develop things specifically for particular segments. So what do I mean by that? One example, and it's back to starting with business outcomes, is through our acquisitions, we know that we will drive more revenue if our client-facing employees and biggest revenue producers know who specializes in what area and who they can bring to their deal team to give our clients a more fulsome experience. Like, hey, this person sitting in Wisconsin specializes in this type of area or this type of client problem. So we are starting to build relationships and, you know, communities of practice specifically for revenue producing client-facing employees, so that not only are we building a sense of community and building culture, because these are acquired companies that need to come together, but there's a real business bottom line impact coming out of it, and the client is benefiting. So that's one example, and that's very targeted to client-facing employees. You need to do targeted programs for diverse employees. As I've said, we can do programs, but what I have sometimes said to senior leaders is, can you think of one person in your line of leadership that is diverse, that you know has a ton of untapped potential, that you are personally mentoring? And many times the answer is no, they've not. They're railing against the numbers, but they're not personally doing that. So that plus programmatic pieces, of course. And then your high potentials and people who you want to build as successors and leaders of the future, which at the end of the day, all three segments, there's overlaps between them. But those are some examples of things that you would do that's more segmented. One last
I love that. Yeah, go ahead.
I know that people have been debating the return to work and coming back in the office. I don't think we'll ever go back to 5 days a week. And I personally had a lot of inertia, personally pushing myself to come back in, which I now love being back in on a hybrid basis. It's a bit of a myth that young people are really tech savvy and just want to be at home. What I found in speaking to our entry and junior employees is they love the idea of being in. They want the energy, they want the mentoring. And if we don't give them that, we fail and they fail. So that's probably another segment I would really think hard about, is those junior and entry level talent, because they need to learn those in-person skills and capabilities.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I think we are, I mean, the shameless plug for 10KCs, we're actually just launching a return to work configuration so that office as a destination, as Chris had shared earlier, is like, it's not cool if you go to the office and you're just on Zooms all day, but how can you use smart matching so that when people are back in the office Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, they actually get to meet a new colleague or have a coffee with someone. So we're really excited about that next chapter of our connectivity solution. So this final question, we talked about, I think, Manisha, what you'd shared is so helpful. And this is, we're all almost about to wrap, which is everyone's harping on these problems. And it's 3 years since I think a lot of companies set these goals, but creating accountability, when you actually ask the leaders, it's usually not there. And it's critical because I think, as this poll question will show, it's really important. And Giselle, you're gonna have to text me and remind me the answer to this. But I think it's the answer is B. But if you create mentoring and if you make it specifically accountable to all of your managers and leaders, which currently you might think they are, but usually they're actually not, you can have incredible impact on retention and actually increasing some of that visibility. So I know somehow we are at time, and I wanted to send a huge thank you to my panelists. I think, as I said at the top, when we had the opportunity to do this webinar, I thought about who are kind of 4 people I get to nerd out on, and our first ask went to these 4 people. So I'm pumped that we did it, and thank you for joining, and congratulations on all of your results, and for finding time out of your very hectic schedules to join us. So thank you so much, and have a great rest of the week, and happy Memorial Day to anyone in the US.